When I took my fiancée Rachel Bennett to the bridal studio in downtown San Francisco to pick out her wedding dress, I was expecting one of those quiet, romantic moments where everything feels right, like a soft focus movie scene where the groom smiles lovingly while the bride twirls in satin and lace, glowing in joy, maybe tossing out a casual, "Does this make me look like a fairy tale?" But that day turned into something else entirely the moment I heard her voice in my head, not her real voice, not what she was saying to the assistant about fabric and train length, but the raw, unfiltered voice inside her thoughts. If I run away tomorrow, she wondered, would I be faster in sneakers than in heels? My mind blanked. I had always had this odd, borderline useless superpower since I was a kid, being able to hear the inner thoughts of people who didn't love me. Not everyone, not all the time, just those who didn't care about me deep down. Most people would kill for a cool power, like flying or teleportation, but nope, I got stuck with the ultimate heartbreak detector. As a kid, it meant realizing my fourth-grade crush thought I looked like a hamster. As an adult, it meant dodging fake love like a professional. Even when buying fruit at a street vendor, I could use their inner monologue to pick out the juiciest, ripest durian. But the biggest perker curse was with relationships. I could always tell if someone didn't truly love me. And that's why I had fallen for Rachel. Because from the very first day I met her at a fundraiser gala thrown by her father's company, the Bennetts, the kind of elite family that casually owned half of the city skyline, I couldn't hear a thing. No inner voice. No doubts. Just silence, sweet and suspiciously pure. So I believed her. I believed that when she smiled and asked to get to know me, she meant it. I believed her when she confessed, shaking like a leaf, with roses clutched in her trembling hands. And for 2 whole years, that silence stayed. No thoughts. No second guesses. It was the quiet of love, I thought. The peace of mutual affection. But now, one day before our wedding, I suddenly heard her again, and the words hit like a sucker punch to the ribs. "Aiden says we'll run away tomorrow. I'll need sneakers to keep up." Aiden. So it had a name. I didn't know what shocked me more, the fact that she was thinking about running away, or that the plan had a name. I stared at her, pretending to smile, watching the assistant quietly tuck a pair of white designer sneakers into the garment bag along with her gown. Rachel gave me a quick nod and walked out to take a phone call, murmuring softly with that calm, executive tone she always used in the boardroom. She'd recently taken over the Bennett family investment firm and had been swamped, barely having time to sleep let alone plan a wedding. We'd barely seen each other in the past 2 months, and I had chalked it up to work stress. But now, as I trailed behind her, numb with realization, I wasn't sure what was worse, being blindsided, or feeling like a complete idiot for missing the signs. "Rachel," I called out as she opened the car door, my voice cracking as I tried to find any excuse to stop her. She paused, turned, said something about a meeting and a deadline, then told the driver to step on it. Her inner voice echoed again, colder this time. "Aiden's pissed. If I don't show up soon, he won't let me go home again. I have to fix this." I stood there frozen on the sidewalk while her car disappeared into traffic, heart pounding, mind spinning. Then I did what I do best. I used my ability to dig deeper. I reached out to her assistant. Well, now I knew he was more than that. Ethan Walker. That was Aiden's real name. The white moonlight of Rachel's youth. The one her family never approved of, the one she lost, the one who left the country after some scandal involving his wealthy family denying his status as an illegitimate son. According to my own little interrogation, Rachel had fallen for me initially because I reminded her of him, same cheekbones, similar smile, a tragic echo of her forbidden love. I was the stand-in. The placeholder. The emotionally safe substitute for someone she believed she couldn't have. But now Ethan was back. And apparently, she wanted her original leading man. I sat alone in my apartment that night, staring at my suitcase. The plan had been to fly out after the wedding for our honeymoon in Europe. But instead, I grabbed that suitcase and started packing. 2 hours later, I had a one-way first-class ticket to LA, then connecting internationally to Zurich. I wasn't going to be the man who stood at the altar looking like a clown while someone else swooped in and stole the show. If Rachel and Ethan wanted to reenact some movie-worthy romantic rescue, I wasn't going to play the third wheel. I told my best friend Jake Miller everything. He raised an eyebrow, took the tape off a moving box, and muttered, "Good. Dad just brought you a whole sack of urea. It's durable." I blinked. "What?" "We own a pesticide business," he said flatly. Long story. Jake was the only person I trusted in moments like this, and when he offered to help me ghost the entire event, I didn't hesitate. My family had long since moved to the States permanently. We'd planned a low-key destination wedding anyway, so there were only a handful of guests from China, all of whom I was now planning to ghost. I crafted the perfect trap. On the surface, everything about the wedding was proceeding as planned. Rachel and I greeted guests in matching formal wear, me with a tight smile, her with that practiced poise that made her such a perfect public figure. But in her head, she was anything but calm. "Is Ethan here yet? We're finally going to be together." 3 years. I've waited 3 years. Her voice in my head was like static in my ears. I smiled at her, hollow inside. She told me to go rest in the lounge, that she'd take care of guests. How thoughtful. I nodded. Then, just as I was heading to the dressing room, I bumped into him. Ethan. Tall, polished, smug as hell. Wearing a suit nearly identical to mine. How original. He grinned. "Mr. Carter, huh? Sorry, didn't mean to show up in the same look. Would be funny if people thought I was the groom." His voice in my head sneered, "Laugh all you want, loser. In 3 hours, she's mine. Let's see if you're still smiling then." I clenched my fist, kept the grin, and said, "All suits look the same from a distance." Then I waved to a staff member to seat him. Jake leaned over and muttered, "That guy is really something. Do we get to beat him up yet?" "Not yet. Not until the curtain rises." Because Rachel had altered the ceremony script. She'd go on stage first, I'd follow, making it easier for Ethan to crash the party right on cue. And I let it happen. Let it all unfold. Let Ethan grab the mic, call her name, make his cheesy speech, and shout, "Rachel, will you come with me?" And of course she did, nodded with misty eyes, sneakers poking out from beneath the hem of her wedding dress. She whispered, "I do," to the wrong man, the man she never stopped loving, in front of everyone. Ethan grinned like he'd just won the Super Bowl, turned to address the absent groomie and said, "Logan, I know you love her, but she loves me. I hope you understand." The guests gasped. Rachel looked radiant in betrayal. Ethan beamed in smugness. But there was one problem. I wasn't there. There was no groom waiting off stage. No one to cry, no one to fight, no one to validate their drama. Only silence. Until the screen behind them flickered to life with a giant red banner, "Runaway groom statement, due to Rachel Bennett's affair with Ethan Walker, I've chosen to vanish and give you all a good laugh. Consider this wedding officially cancelled." The screen flipped again. Dozens of recent photos of Rachel and Ethan together, dinners, secret meetups, hotel lobbies. The crowd erupted in chaos. Ethan's victory speech wilted on his tongue. Rachel's face turned the shade of death. And me? I was at gate 36B, sipping overpriced espresso and watching the live stream Jake sent to my phone, laughing like a madman as the guests scrambled, the staff panicked, and Rachel stood frozen in the spotlight with a man she'd just chosen, only to be left with nothing but the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in the vacuum. Jake sent me the video 5 minutes into the ceremony and I nearly choked on my espresso from laughing too hard, because watching Rachel and Ethan stand awkwardly on that stage like two drama club dropouts with no audience was way funnier than anything I could have imagined, especially when no one clapped, no one cheered, and instead of basking in applause for their so-called epic love story, they were met with confusion, whispering, and people actively pulling out their phones to Google "runaway groom viral" before the screen behind them even finished showing the slideshow of their hotel meetups, and I swear the best part wasn't even Ethan's stunned silence or Rachel's frozen smile. It was when one of the guests, bless their chaotic heart, shouted, "Yo, is the groom seriously gone?" and the crowd shifted into full gossip mode like a middle school hallway during a scandal. Because suddenly no one cared about Rachel and Ethan's little Romeo and Juliet stunt anymore, they just wanted to know where I was and why I'd left them all there watching the equivalent of a cancelled soap opera episode unfold live, and meanwhile Jake kept texting updates like some battlefield correspondent. "Logan, I swear to God, Rachel's dad just walked out without saying a word, her mom looks like she's about to faint, and Ethan looks like he's about to cry but is trying to make it look poetic." And I was cackling in my airport seat while the flight attendant gave me a weird look, but whatever, because poetic justice tastes better with first-class champagne. And then Jake sent another clip where Rachel was trying to salvage the moment by making some half-baked speech about true love always finds its way, but the crowd had already started murmuring, some guests outright leaving, and the MC literally walked off stage mid-sentence, leaving the mic squealing with feedback while Rachel stood there blinking into the abyss. And Ethan, man, this dude had the nerve to still hold out the mic like he expected someone to hand him a bouquet and a medal for cheating with flair, but all he got was an empty aisle and the red word "cheater" still glowing behind him like a big fat exclamation mark. And it only got worse from there, because after the ceremony officially crumbled into chaos, Jake filmed the guests milling around looking for me, some asking the staff if I'd been kidnapped, others checking the lounge and bridal suite like I was some hidden Easter egg, while Ethan and Rachel just stood there like department store mannequins that no one wanted to buy, and then they left the stage themselves, trying to act like it was all part of some grand plan, but you could see the panic in their eyes, especially when Mrs. Bennett stormed up and slapped Rachel so hard her veil shifted, yelling something about family disgrace and "how dare you throw away everything for a man who wore the same damn tux as the groom." And when Jake told me later that Rachel tried to chase him out of the ballroom to ask where I'd gone, he just laughed in her face and said, "Oh, Logan. He's somewhere you'll never reach again," and damn, I owe him a steak dinner for that one, because that line was chef's kiss, and by the time my plane took off, I was already done with all of it. San Francisco, Rachel, the Bennett Empire, Ethan's smug face, every single person who thought I was just going to stand there and take it like a prop in their twisted fairy tale. And you know what, I didn't just escape, I won. Because now the internet was on my side, the guests were pissed, Rachel looked like a public embarrassment, and Ethan, well, Ethan had officially earned his place as the leading clown in a wedding that became the punchline of the year, and while I was safely flying across the ocean, Jake kept blowing up my messages with updates that only made things sweeter. "Dude, Rachel and Ethan just tried to go to your villa to explain everything. They were banging on the gate like lunatics. I told them you left the country and their faces fell like two popped balloons," and apparently, while all this was going down, the Bennett family was scrambling to clean up the PR mess, especially because half the guests had already leaked footage of the fiasco online, complete with the runaway groom statement, and the slideshow of Ethan's many hotel check-ins, and trust me, the internet didn't go easy on them. Memes started rolling in within hours. My favorite was one where someone photoshopped sneakers onto Rachel's wedding dress and wrote, "Ready to run from commitment in style," and there was another of Ethan with a mic and the caption, "Sir, this is a Wendy's," and while they were burning on every platform from Reddit to TikTok, I was already sipping coffee on the other side of the world, safe in a place where no one knew my name, no one expected me to smile through betrayal, and no one would ever again confuse me for someone who'd tolerate being someone's second choice. And when I landed, Jake called immediately, his voice breathless with laughter as he recounted how the guests turned on Ethan and Rachel in real time, especially when Mrs. Bennett refused to acknowledge Ethan even after the mess, still calling him Mr. Walker, with ice in her voice, and get this, she didn't even give them a red envelope, just said, "You two deserve each other," and walked away while Rachel stood there with tears in her eyes, mascara smudged, and Ethan looked like he was reconsidering every life choice that brought him to this moment, and honestly, I couldn't have planned a better downfall if I tried. But the cherry on top came a few weeks later when Jake sent me a wedding invitation, not for me, obviously, but for Rachel and Ethan. Yeah, they actually tried to go through with another wedding after the disaster, and you know what, it was pathetic. They had to downsize to a side ballroom. Most of the original guests didn't show. Mr. Bennett completely ghosted the event, and the only family representative was Rachel's mom, who sat there with a face like stone, only calling Ethan Mr. Walker again and reminding him on stage to act with integrity and stop embarrassing the family. And when she gave her toast, it was literally a passive-aggressive lecture on morals and shame, which made Ethan so mad he smashed Rachel's bouquet backstage, and Rachel had to console him while trying to keep her mom from fainting again, and Jake's commentary was gold. It was like watching a sitcom where everyone knows the couple won't make it to season 2, and I just laughed, shook my head, and said, they deserve every second of it, because they did. And even though I was already building a new life for myself overseas, new business, new environment, no Rachel, I knew the universe still had more twists to throw at them, because people who build their love stories on lies never get happy endings. And just when I thought the saga was over, Rachel came crawling back into my life, months later, through a business deal no less. Because apparently her company had hit turbulence and the Bennetts were trying to work with one of our international branches, and guess who was overseeing that region? Yep, yours truly. And when my assistant Sophie told me the client's name, I nearly dropped my pen, because it had been a long time since I'd heard it. Rachel Bennett, or as I now like to call her, Exhibit A in Why You Don't Date Your Replacement Level Crush. And when I finally took her call strictly Bennett for review, and hung up before she could bring up the past, because whatever Rachel was looking for now, regret, closure, maybe a second chance, it was too late, way too late. And while I knew this wasn't the end of her reaching out, I also knew this time I held the power, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite our story just to ease her guilt, not when I'd already rewritten it myself, and mine had a way better ending. I didn't hear from Rachel again for a while after that cold, clipped business call, and honestly, I figured that was the end of it, just a desperate attempt to claw back some dignity through polite closure, or maybe even test if I'd bite at the idea of unfinished feelings. But I didn't, and I wouldn't, because even if her voice cracked on the phone, even if she whispered sorry like it still meant something, I had already packed away that part of my life like a dusty photo album in a box labeled mistakes. I survived, and moved on, until one day Sophie came into my office, blinking like she had just seen a ghost, and said, Mr. Carter, Miss Bennett asked me to pass along a message. She's divorced. And I didn't say anything at first, didn't even blink, just let that word echo in my head like a slow-ticking metronome. Divorced, as in over, as in done, as in Rachel and Ethan's glorious fairy tale wedding didn't even make it to the 1-year mark. And even though I had a hunch that things weren't going to last between them, because relationships born from betrayal rarely do, I still felt a strange twinge when I heard it. Not sympathy, not satisfaction, just something like a cold breeze slipping under the door of a sealed-off room. And later that night when I told Jake, his response was a messy mix of outrage and glee. Wait, what? That toolbag Ethan dumped her already? Tell me how, tell me everything, tell me this isn't the karma I ordered arriving express delivery. And I gave him the short version: how Ethan had secretly been married abroad to a rich older woman, hoping to cash in on her estate, how he lost the inheritance after a lawsuit with the woman's son, how he returned to the States broke, latched back onto Rachel like a leech, and how her mother found out, stormed into her penthouse, and smacked her in the face with the damning photos. And Jake just whistled and said, now that's what I call poetic justice. And yeah, I couldn't deny the irony, because Rachel gave up everything, her family's respect, her position, for a man who literally turned out to be the worst-case scenario, the kind of guy who marries for money and leaves when the money runs out. And even though I should have felt vindicated, I mostly just felt like I was watching someone else's rerun. Something sad that used to hurt but now just made me vaguely tired, like I had sat through this soap opera before and already knew all the endings. And I kept my distance, professionally and emotionally, didn't respond to her texts, ignored the emails where she just wanted to check in, because let's be real, there was nothing left to check in on. And every time Sophie updated me on the project status, I made sure she handled all communication with Rachel. Because even if part of me still wanted to understand why she did it, I knew I'd never get a reason that made it okay. And then came the cherry on top. Sophie returned from a business trip in San Francisco and casually said, she wanted me to tell you that she's sorry again, and she's learning to be okay on her own now, and I just raised an eyebrow and said nothing, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people rarely change, they just get better at performing the version of themselves they think you'll pity, and I wasn't about to become her redemption arc. Her lesson learned, her comforting backup plan when the fantasy crashed and burned, and Rachel may have thought she could slot me back into the story now that Ethan had flamed out, but she forgot one thing, I wasn't standing still while she played house I'd built something better, and the life I had now didn't need her in it, and if anything, she was just another chapter that ended the moment she handed her heart to someone else and expected me to be okay with holding the door for them, and so I stayed focused on my work, on my team, on growing what I'd created from the ashes of that humiliation, and eventually the gossip about her divorce died down, the memes faded, and her name stopped popping up in my inbox until Jake called one day, voice crackling with excitement, Logan, bro, guess what, she's back in town, and I groaned, already knowing where this was going, don't tell me she's at another gala, and he cackled, nope, better shopping at your family's old mall with a new haircut and a face like she just finished crying for 3 hours, and part of me didn't want to care, but the other part, the curious, maybe still slightly bruised part, wondered what she looked like now, not physically, but emotionally, because the last time we met, she was all polish and confidence, all high heels and smugness, but now she was divorced, disgraced, and demoted by her own family, and I wondered if she still carried herself like the world owed her something, or if she'd finally tasted what it felt like to be the one left behind, and I got my answer a week later, when I returned to San Francisco for Jake's wedding, a low-key outdoor event in Golden Gate Park where everyone was sun-kissed and relaxed and smiling for once, and I brought my daughter Lily with Maya, that's right, I have a daughter now, 6 years old, stubborn like her mom and smart like me, full of questions and cotton candy demands. And while my wife was off on a research trip in Antarctica, because yes, I married a scientist, and yes, she's amazing, Lily and I decided to turn the wedding trip into a little father-daughter adventure, and that's how we ended up at Bennett Plaza, the very mall her family still technically owned, although Rachel's control over it had clearly waned, and Lily, being the ball of chaos she is, took off running toward the children's play area while I chased after her, and then boom, collision, someone rounded the corner. Lily smacked into their legs, and I rushed forward to apologize, saying, I'm so sorry, she's fast, only to freeze mid-sentence when the woman turned around, and yeah, it was her, Rachel Bennett, no makeup, plain blazer, flats instead of heels, hair pulled back like she was just trying to get through the day without crying, and for the first time since I met her, she didn't look composed, she looked real, raw, and a little hollow, and when she saw me, she blinked like she wasn't sure if she was imagining it, then gave a faint smile and said, Logan. It's been a while, and I nodded, already bracing myself for whatever awkwardness this would become, but then Lily peeked up from behind my legs and said, sorry, miss, did I bump into you? And Rachel's expression cracked, not in a bad way, more like a light finally flickered in her, and she crouched down, smiled at Lily, and said, it's okay, just be careful next time, then stood up and looked at me again, your daughter's lovely. And I said thanks, not offering more than that, because this wasn't a reunion, this was a coincidence, and I didn't owe her any stories, any updates, any warmth, but then she surprised me by asking, do you want to grab a coffee? There's a new cafe upstairs, they serve your old favorite Robusta, right? And I hesitated, more out of politeness than interest, but Lily was already tugging on my sleeve saying she wanted to play, so I told the manager to watch her for a few minutes, then followed Rachel to the second floor, where we sat in awkward silence until the drinks arrived, and when I ordered something else, Vienna coffee instead of Robust, Ash raised an eyebrow. I thought you didn't like sweet coffee, and I shrugged. My wife says too much caffeine's bad for the stomach, she always switches it for me, and Rachel paused, like that one sentence had sliced open whatever fragile script she had rehearsed, and for a second she looked like she might cry again, but instead she smiled. I saw photos of your wedding, Switzerland, right? It looked beautiful, and I nodded, not confirming or denying, just sipping the coffee slowly while she looked down at hers like it might give her courage, and then she whispered, do you ever think about what might have happened if I'd chosen differently? And I met her gaze, steady and quiet, I think you did choose. And now we both live with that, and she flinched like the words physically stung, but said nothing, and when she reached into her bag to grab something, I assumed it was a tissue or some awkward gift, but instead it was a copy of The Little Prince, which she handed to me with a faint smile, for Lily tell her not to run so fast next time, and just like that, our moment ended not with closure, not with regret, but with something gentler, something sadder, and as I walked away holding that little book, I realized that maybe this was the final page we needed, the footnote to a story that never quite worked, and I didn't need to hear her inner voice this time to know that she was trapped in a memory, still chasing something she let go, and I was already free. After that quiet, almost cinematic run-in at the coffee shop, I honestly thought I'd close the book for good, not in the dramatic, we'll never see each other again, kind of way, but in the real, adult, emotionally exhausted kind of way where the past becomes just another chapter you don't bother to reread, and for a while, it stayed that way, because life moved on, projects demanded attention, my daughter Lily kept growing too fast, and my wife brilliant, grounded, hilarious returned from Antarctica with frostbitten fingers and a heart full of stories about ice cores and penguin nests, and being around her reminded me of how real love is built, not from grand gestures or stolen spotlights, but from the tiny, loyal, day-to-day decisions to choose each other over and over again. And every time I glanced at that copy of The Little Prince Rachel had given Lily still pristine on her bookshelf, I felt nothing but a faint sense of peace, like even that belonged to another lifetime, a version of me that no longer existed, until one night, as I was reviewing a portfolio from one of our West Coast partners, Sophie pinged me with an odd expression on her face and said, "Mr. Carter, I think you'll want to see this," and forwarded me a confidential internal report from one of the Bennett family's subsidiaries, which, despite being sanitized for public consumption, made it very clear that Rachel had recently been quietly removed from the executive board, replaced by her cousin, and suddenly it all made sense: the exhausted look in her eyes, the desperate politeness at the coffee shop, the way she said, "I'm learning to be okay on my own," as if she was still trying to convince herself, because the truth was she had lost everything, not just me, not just Ethan, but the legacy she'd been raised to inherit, the corporate throne that used to orbit around her surname like it was some divine right, and while I wasn't exactly surprised, let's be honest, her reputation never recovered from the wedding fiasco still made me pause, not out of sympathy, but because of the twisted poetry and how the power she once used to control everything had turned on her. And when Jake heard the news, he laughed for a full minute before saying, "Guess karma doesn't accept refunds," but I stayed quiet, scrolling through the footnotes of the report where one anonymous board member noted that Rachel's decision-making had grown, emotional and erratic, and that, internal trust has diminished, and I thought about how people like her are raised in glass castles, taught to lead with charm and strategy, but never shown how to survive actual failure, and now she was floating in the wreckage of every bridge she burned, every bet she lost, every illusion she chased, and part of me wondered what she was doing right now, sitting in whatever corner of San Francisco she hadn't been pushed out of yet, maybe staring out a window, maybe holding another cup of coffee and wondering how the hell it had all unraveled so fast. But even then, I didn't reach out, didn't send a message or a condolence or even a polite acknowledgement, because I knew better than anyone that she wasn't looking for empathy. She was looking for rescue, for someone to blame, for some narrative where she was the tragic heroine who simply loved too hard, and I refused to play that part again. So instead, I focused on work, on Lily's first science fair, on figuring out whether we were doing summer in Europe or Hawaii this year, and let the ghosts of my past haunt someone else for once. But life being life, of course she found a way back in, and this time not through emotion or coincidence but through money, because 3 months later, our firm acquired a startup that had quietly been bankrolled by one of Rachel's last-ditch investments, and while most people didn't connect the dots, I did the second I saw her name buried in the shareholder records, and I knew she'd show up again, knew it wouldn't be long before she'd schedule a meeting, under the guise of business, of course, and I was right, because one Friday afternoon, Sophie came into my office and said, "Miss Bennett has requested a 5-minute call to discuss the transition," and I sighed, leaned back in my chair, and said, "Put her through," already knowing this wasn't about documents or financial transfers, and sure enough, the second I answered, she opened not with numbers or percentages, but with my name, soft and unsure. "Logan, thank you for taking this," and I responded with the same professional chill I'd practiced 100 times, "Miss Bennett, let's keep this brief, but she didn't flinch, didn't argue, just sighed and said, "I know you don't owe me anything, and I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to say you were right, about everything." And I said nothing, because what was I supposed to say to that? That I forgave her, that I was sorry it didn't work out, that I hoped she found peace. No, I stayed silent, and she filled the gap. He wasn't who I thought he was, Ethan. He was cold, manipulative. Everything he gave me came with strings, and every day with him felt like a negotiation, not a relationship. And I finally spoke, "Sounds like you finally learned what a real partnership isn't," and she gave a hollow laugh. "Yeah, it took me long enough, huh?" And then came the part one knew was coming, the part she rehearsed in the mirror before dialing. "Logan, I'm not asking for anything, I wanted you to know that I regret it. Not just choosing him, but hurting you. You were the only person who ever really saw me." And I threw that away, and for a brief second, I could almost see her again, her eyes brimming with tears at that coffee shop, the way her hand trembled when she handed Lily the book, the fragility of someone who finally realized they had misread the ending to their own story. But then I blinked, and it was gone, and I reminded myself, apologies don't erase betrayal, they just make it quieter, and I said, "Rachel, I sincerely hope you find what you're looking for. But that version of us, it's gone. It doesn't live here anymore." And with that, I ended the call, my heart steady, my voice even, and for the first time in years, I realized I didn't feel bitter anymore, didn't feel angry, or vindicated, or smug. I just felt free, like I had finally outgrown the version of myself that needed her approval, that chased her silence, that mistook being unreadable for being real, and now all I wanted was peace, routine, and the soft quiet joy of watching my daughter grow up without ghosts whispering in the background. And as I stood by the window watching the city below, I whispered, more to myself than to her, "This time, I'm the one who disappears," and meant it. You'd think after everything, after the runaway wedding, the headlines, the crash and burn marriage, and her corporate exile, Rachel would have disappeared from my orbit permanently, and for a while, she actually did, which gave me space to breathe, recalibrate, and focus entirely on the life I'd built from the ashes of our imploded past. But peace has a funny way of being temporary. Like no matter how far you run or how hard you close the door, certain people just know how to find a crack to slip through, and in Rachel's case, it wasn't a dramatic reappearance or an emotional phone call. It was subtle, slow, almost strategic, like a shadow that grew a little longer each day, until one afternoon I opened my email and found a forwarded article from Sophie with the subject line, "Thought you might want to see this," and there it was. Rachel Bennett spotted at a downtown startup pitch event in LA, looking thinner, paler, but with the same defiant glint in her eyes, except this time she wasn't the headliner, just one of the investors in the back row, and I almost laughed out loud, because the Rachel I once knew would never play backup to anyone, let alone sit silently while someone else held the mic, and yet here she was, trying to claw her way back into relevance one startup at a time, and if I had to guess, I'd say she was doing it the only way she knew how, by attaching herself to whoever had momentum and hoping to ride their wave until people forgot who she used to be. And I should have felt nothing, maybe a little smug at best, but instead, all I felt was tired, not of her, not even of the memories, but of the way she kept orbiting my life like a comet that refused to crash or fly off for good, just circling endlessly, too distant to matter but too familiar to ignore. And the part that annoyed me most was that she still hadn't learned to let go, because not 2 weeks after that article dropped, Sophie told me Rachel had sent another request, this time not for a call, not for a meeting, but for a personal favor. She wanted me to speak at a youth entrepreneurship event where she'd be moderating, said she valued my insights and thought it would be meaningful if I shared my journey, and I nearly deleted the request on the spot, but then something stopped me. Curiosity, not nostalgia, but an idea, a small, petty, deliciously sharp idea that maybe it was time I stopped just dodging her and started reminding her of everything she gave up, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through success, through the calm, confident presence of a man who no longer needed her approval. And so I accepted, with the kind of icy professionalism that I knew would get under her skin more than any insult ever could. And when the event day arrived, I walked into that conference hall dressed not to impress but to assert I wasn't flashy, just sharp, precise, everything she remembered and everything she'd never have again. And the second she saw me, I caught the flicker in her expression, surprise, maybe a little hope, but mostly that old tension between regret and pride, and she smiled in that composed way of hers, extended her hand, and said, "Logan, thanks for coming," and I shook it like I was greeting any other acquaintance, not the woman who once planned to leave me at the altar, and we went through the motions panel introductions, small talk, audience questions, and when it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back, not in a cruel way, but in a way that made it very clear that I had thrived, that I had not only survived everything she put me through but built a life that was fuller, richer, and infinitely more honest, and I could see it in the way she watched me, that slight trembling in her fingers as she clutched the cue cards, the way she kept nodding too much when I mentioned values like loyalty, long-term thinking, and emotional transparency, and afterward, as people gathered to ask questions and shake hands, she stood a few feet away, clearly debating whether to say something, and eventually she did, pulling me aside and whispering, "You were incredible up there, you've really become everything I always knew you could be," and I tilted my head, gave her a polite smile, and said, "I became that in spite of you, not because of you," and she blinked, stunned, like the words hadn't just hit her, they'd gutted her, and I walked away before she could respond, before she could try to play the reformed ex or the humbled prodigal. Because I wasn't there to heal her guilt, I was there to remind her that some choices are irreversible, and if that made me petty, then fine, I'd rather be petty than pitiful, and as I got into my car that night, Lily's voice came through the speaker. She was video calling with my wife, showing off a finger painting she'd done of our family, and in the drawing, she had given me a tiny superhero cape, and I smiled so hard my face hurt. Because this was what real legacy looked like, not billion-dollar boardrooms or last-name empires, but a little girl who believed her dad could do anything, and a woman who loved me without needing me to read her mind, who showed up every day with quiet consistency instead of stormy declarations, and I realized then that Rachel had never understood what love really meant, not because she didn't want to, but because she was too busy chasing fireworks to appreciate the warmth of a steady flame, and no matter how many public panels she hosted or apologies she rehearsed, that truth would always remain, and I didn't need revenge, not anymore, because my life itself was the most undeniable, inescapable answer to everything she threw away, and that's why when I got home that night, I didn't even mention seeing her to my wife, didn't feel the urge. The envelope with Rachel's handwriting sat on my desk for almost a week, unopened after the first read, not because I was unsure of my answer but because some part of me wanted to give her the illusion of hope, the faint chance that maybe, just maybe, I'd show up and give her some kind of closure she could hold on to, but deep down we both knew what that note really was. It wasn't an invitation to a gala. It was a final grasp at a ghost, a way of saying, "Remember me," without admitting how much she already lived in the past, and while she scribbled "You were always the rose" like it meant something profound, I couldn't help but see the irony, because I was never the rose, not really. I was the gardener who loved without condition, who tended to what I thought was real, and when the thorns cut me, I didn't bleed quietly, I walked away, and I never looked back, and yet here she was, trying to dig up something buried, trying to make poetry out of pain as if a pretty metaphor could erase betrayal. But no matter how nicely you package regret, it still smells like decay underneath, so I never RSVP'd, never replied, never even sent the envelope back. I just filed it away like a record of a chapter closed, and that silence must have said everything because the gala came and went without another word from her, and I didn't watch the coverage, didn't care who attended, didn't need to know what gown she wore or how many articles fawned over her comeback, because my story had already moved on, and that chapter didn't include her anymore, not even as a cameo, and real life continued in its own quiet, powerful way, like the rhythm of something finally at peace, until one summer evening, after dinner on the patio, Lily crawled into my lap with her little tablet and said, "Dad, can we read again?" And there it was, the weathered copy of The Little Prince, the one Rachel had given her. And part of me hesitated, not because I didn't want to read it, but because I suddenly realized how much meaning that book used to hold, how many moments it had once represented, and how little weight it had now, just pages and ink and one final symbol from a story that had long since unraveled. So I opened it with a smile and started to read, my voice soft under the fading sun, and as we got to the part about the rose, the one the prince had watered, protected, and ultimately left behind, Lily looked up at me and asked, "Why did he leave the rose if he loved it?" And I paused for a second, then answered, "Because sometimes, no matter how much you care for something, you have to let it go when it doesn't bloom back, and she blinked like she didn't quite understand but nodded anyway, resting her head on my chest as I continued reading, and that moment hit me harder than I expected, because I realized that this was the real ending, not some dramatic confrontation, not a second chance or a long speech at a glittery event, but this quiet scene with my daughter, warm and safe, with no ghosts clinging to the edges of my life. And that's what Rachel would never understand. No matter how many letters she wrote or galas she hosted, she was never the Rose, not in the way she imagined, because real love isn't just about being chosen once, it's about being chosen every single day after, in the silence, in the chaos, in the mundane. And when she chose Ethan, she didn't just pick someone else, she discarded the soil, the roots, the gardener, and when that fantasy crumbled, she wanted to return. Like nothing had happened, but I had already bloomed elsewhere, and she was just left with wilted petals of a story she tried to rewrite too late. And I know she probably still thinks of me, maybe more than she wants to admit, maybe less than I assume, maybe she replays that coffee shop scene in her head, maybe she wonders what would have happened if she'd said something different, or if she'd never looked back at Ethan when he returned. But the truth is, those maybes are hers to carry, not mine. Because I've let go of them all, and now she's just a chapter people whisper about sometimes, a name mentioned in old articles, a headline from a long-forgotten scandal, while I'm here, building the future day by day, watching Lily grow up and paint rockets and foxes and roses without knowing she once held the final note of someone else's unfinished symphony. And that's exactly how I want it. No bitterness, no baggage, just clean air and honest love. And if Rachel ever walks into another cafe and sees someone who looks like me, maybe she'll blink twice and wonder, but that's all it will be, a flicker, a pause, a what if, lost to time, because I don't live in her memory anymore, and she certainly doesn't live in mine, not really, not where it matters. And when Lily finally fell asleep that night, her hand still wrapped around my finger, I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You'll never have to guess what love feels like. Not while I'm around." And in that quiet promise, I found all the peace Rachel never could, because she wanted to be someone's forever fantasy, but I became someone's real world, and that's a crown she'll never wear, no matter how many times she signs her name at the bottom of a gala invite, because at the end of the day, love isn't a performance, it's a presence, and I've already left the stage.